Grim defeat. Professor Dumbledore sent all the Gryffindors back to the Great Hall, where they were joined in 10 minutes later by students from Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, who looked extremely confused. The teachers and I need to conduct a thorough search of the castle, Professor Dumbledore told them, and as Professor McGonagall and Flitwick closed all the doors into the hall. I'm afraid that, for your own safety, you will have to spend the night here. I want the prefects to stand guard on the entrance to the hall, and I am leaving the head boy and girl in charge. Any disturbance should be reported immediately, he added to Percy, who was looking immensely proud and important. Send word with one of the ghosts. Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the hall, and said, "Oh, yes, you'll be needing. And in one casual wave of his wand, the long tables flew to the edges of the hall and stood themselves against the wall. Another wave of the floor covered with hundreds of squishy purple sleeping bags. Sleep well, said Professor Dumbledore, closing the door behind him. The hall immediately began to buzz excitedly. The Gryffindors were telling the rest of the school what just happened. Everyone, into the sleeping bags, shouted Percy. Come on now. No more talking. Lights out in 10 minutes. Come on, Harry said to Ron and Hermione. He seized 3 sleeping bags and dragged them into the corner. Do you think Black's still in the castle? Hermione whispered anxiously. Dumbledore obviously thinks he might be, said Ron. It's very lucky he picked tonight, you know, said Hermione as they climbed fully dressed into their sleeping bags, propped themselves up on their elbows to talk. The one night we're not in the tower. I reckon he's lost track of time, being on the run, said Ron. Didn't realize it was Halloween, otherwise he'd have come bursting in here. Hermione shuddered. All around them people were asking another the same question. How'd he get in? Maybe he knows how to apparate, said Ravenclaw for a few feet away. Just appear, out of thin air. Disguised himself, probably, said the Hufflepuff 5th year. He couldn't have flown in, suggested Dean Thomas. Honestly, am I the only person who bothered to read Hogwarts a history? Said Hermione crossly to Harry and Ron. Probably, said Ron. Why? Because the castle's protected by more than walls, People entering, there are all sorts of enchantments on it to stop people from entering by stealth. You can't just apparate in here. And I'd like to see a disguise like a fool of Dementor. They're guarding every single entrance of the grounds. They'd have to seen him fly in, too. And Filch knows every single secret passage. They'd have him covered. The lights are going out now, shouted Percy. I want everyone in their sleeping bags and no more talking. The candles all went out at once. The only light now came from the silvery ghosts that were drifting about, talking seriously to the prefects, and the enchanted ceiling, which, like the sky outside, was scattered with stars. What with that and the whispering that still filled the hall, Harry felt as though he were sleeping outdoors in the light wind. Once every hour, a teacher would reappear in the hall to check on everything was quiet. Around 3 in the morning, when many students had finally fallen asleep, Professor Dumbledore came in. Harry watched him looking around for Percy, who had been prowling between the sleeping bags, telling people off for talking. Percy was only a short way from Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who quickly pretended they were asleep as Dumbledore's steps drew near. Any sign of him, Professor? Said Percy in a whisper. No. All well here? Everything under control, sir. Good. There's no point in moving them now. I found a temporary guardian for the Gryffindor portrait hole. You'll be able to move them back in tomorrow. And the fat lady, sir? Oh, hiding in the map of Aglishire on the 2nd floor. Apparently she refused to let Black in without the password, so he attacked her. She's very distressed. But once she calmed down, I'll have Mr. Filch restore her. Harry heard the door of the hall creak open again. And more footsteps. Headmaster! It was Snape. Harry kept quiet until listening hard. The whole of the third floor has been searched. He's not there. And Filch has done the dungeons. Nothing there either. What about the astronomy tower? Professor Trelawney's room? The owlry? All searched. Very well, Service. I didn't really expect Black to linger. Have you any theory as how he got in, Professor? Asked Snape. Harry raised his head slightly off his arms to free his other ear. Many, Service. Each of them as unlikely as the next. Harry opened his eyes a fraction, squinted up to where they stood. Dumbledore's back was to him, but he could see Percy's face rapt with attention, and Snape's profile, which looked angry. You remember the conversation we had, Headmaster? Just before, the start of the term, said Snape, who was barely opening his lips as though he was trying to block Percy out of the conversation. Yes, I do, Service, said Dumbledore, and there was something like a warning in his voice. It seems almost impossible that Black could have entered the school without inside help. I did express my concerns when you appointed. I do not believe a single person inside this castle would have helped Black enter it, said Dumbledore. And his tone made it so clear that the subject was closed that Snape didn't reply. Oh, I must go down to the Dementors, said Dumbledore. I said I would inform them when the search was complete. Didn't they want to help, sir? Said Percy. Oh, yes, said Dumbledore coldly, but I'm afraid no Dementor will cross the threshold of this castle while I'm headmaster. Percy slightly abashed. Dumbledore left the hall, walking quickly and quietly. Snape stood for a moment watching the headmaster with an expression of deep resentment on his face. Then he too left. Harry glanced sideways at Ron and Hermione. Both of them had their eyes open too, reflecting on the starry ceiling. What was all that about? Ron mouthed. The school talked of nothing but Sirius Black for the next few days. The theories of how he had entered the castle became wilder and wilder. Hannah Abbott from Hufflepuff spent much of their time next to biology class telling anyone who would listen that Black could turn into a flowering shrub. The fat lady's ripped canvas had been taken off the wall and replaced with the portrait of Sir Cardigan and his fat grey pony. Nobody was very happy about that, because Sir Cardigan spent half his time challenging the people to duels, and the rest of the time ridiculously complicated passwords, which he changed at least twice a day. He's a complete lunatic, said Seamus Finnegan angrily to Percy. Can't we get anyone else? Oh, none of the other pictures wanted the job, said Percy, frightened of what might what happened to the fat lady, said Sir Cardigan was the only one brave enough to volunteer. Sir Cardigan, however, was the least of Harry's worries. He was now being closely watched. Teachers found excuses to walk along the corridors with him, and Percy Weasley, acting, Harry suspected, under their mother's orders, was trailing him everywhere like an extremely pompous guard dog. To cap it off, Professor McGonagall summoned Harry to her office. Such a somber expression on her face, Harry thought someone must have died. There's no point in hiding it from you any longer, Potter, she said. This is in a very serious voice. I know this will come as a shock to you, but Sirius Black... I know, he's after me, said Harry wearily. I heard Ron's dad telling his mom. Mr. Weasley works for the Ministry of Magic. Professor McGonagall seemed taken aback, but she stared at Harry for a moment or two and then said, I see. Well, in that case, Potter, you'll understand why I don't think it's a good idea for you to be practicing Quidditch in the evenings outside in the field with only your team members. It's very exposed, Potter. We've got our first match Saturday, said Harry, outraged. I've got to train, Professor. Professor McGonagall considered him intently. Harry knew she was deeply interested in Gryffindor's team prospects. It had been, after all, who suggested the seeker in the first place. He waited, holding his breath. Professor McGonagall stood and stared out the window with the Quidditch field just visible through the rain. Well, goodness knows, I'd like us to see us with a cup at last. But all the same, Potter, I'd be happier if a teacher were present. I'll ask Madam Hooch to oversee training sessions. The weather worsened steadily for the first Quidditch match drew near. Undaunted, the Gryffindor team training harder than ever before, under the eye of Madam Hooch. Then, at the final training session before Sunday's match, Oliver Wood gave his team some unwelcome news. We're not playing Slytherin, he told them, looking very angry. Flint's just been to see me. We're playing Hufflepuff instead. Why? Chorused the team. Flint's excuse is that the Seeker's arm is still injured, said Wood, grinding his teeth furiously. But it's obvious why they don't want to play. They don't want to play in this weather. They'll think they'll damage their chances. There had to be strong winds and heavy rains all day, and Wood spoke as he heard the distant rumble of thunder. Ugh. There's nothing wrong with Malfoy's arm, said Harry furiously. He's faking it. I know that, but we can't prove it, said Wood bitterly. And we've been practicing all those moves assuming we were playing Slytherin instead of Hufflepuff. Ugh, their style's quite different. They've got a new captain and a seeker, Cedric Diggory. Angela, Alicia, and Katie suddenly giggled. What? Said Wood, frowning. In the light-hearted behavior. He's that tall, good-looking one, isn't he? Said Angelina. Strong and silent, said Katie, with a straight giggle again. He's only science because he's too thick to string two words together, said Fred impatiently. I don't know why you're so worried over Hufflepuff. It's a pushover. Last time we played them, Harry caught the snitch in about 5 minutes, remember? We're playing completely different conditions, Wood shouted, his eyes bulging slightly. Diggory's put a very strong side together. He's an excellent seeker. I was afraid you'd take it like this. We mustn't relax. We must keep our focus. Slytherin's trying to wrong-foot us. We must win. Oliver, calm down, said Fred, looking slightly alarmed. We're taking Hufflepuff very seriously. Seriously. The day before the match, the winds reached howling point. The rain fell harder than ever. It was so dark inside the corridors and the classrooms that extra torches and lanterns were lit. The Slytherin team was looking very smug indeed, and none of them more so than Malfoy. If only my arm was feeling a bit better, he sighed, as the gale pounded outside the windows. Harry had no room in his head to worry about anything except the match tomorrow. Oliver Wood kept him hurrying up to him between classes and giving him tips. The third time this happened, Wood talked for so long that Harry suddenly realized he was 10 minutes late for the defense against dark arts and set off on the run, with Wood shouting after him, Diggory's got a very fast swerve, Harry. You might want to try looping him. Harry skidded in the hall outside the fence of dark arts classroom, pulled the door open, and dashed inside. Sorry, I'm late, Professor Lupin. But it wasn't Professor Lupin. He looked up in front of him, and the teacher at his desk, it was Snape. The lessons began 10 minutes ago, Potter. So I think we'll make it 10 points from Gryffindor. Sit down. But Harry didn't move. Where's Professor Lupin? He said. He says he is feeling too ill to teach today, said Snape with a twisted smile. I believe I told you to sit down. But Harry stayed where he was. Well, what's wrong with him? Snape's black eyes glittered. Nothing life-threatening, he said, looking through his wish as if he wished it were. 5 more points from Gryffindor, and if I have to ask you to sit down again, it will be 50. Harry walked slowly to his seat and sat down. Snape looked around the class. As I was saying before, Potter interrupted. Professor Lupin has not left any record on the topics you have covered so far. Please, sir, we've done Bogarts, Redcaps, Kappas, Grindylows, Hermione said quickly, and we're just about to start. Be quiet! Snapped Snape coldly. I did not ask for information. I merely am commenting on Professor Lupin's lack of organization. He's the best defense against us teacher we've had, said Dean Thomas boldly. And then there was a murmur of agreement from the rest of the class. Snape looked more menacing than ever. You are easily satisfied. Lupin is hardly overtaxing you. I would expect first years to be able to deal with Redcaps and Grindylows. Today we shall discuss. Harry watched him flick through the textbook to the very back of the chapter, which he must have known they hadn't covered. Werewolves, said Snape. But, sir, said Hermione, seemingly unable to restrain herself, we're not supposed to do werewolves yet. We're due to start Hinky Punks. Miss Granger, said Snape in a voice full of deadly calm, I was under the impression I am teaching this lesson, not you. And I am telling you to turn to page 394. He glanced around again. All of you now! With many bitter, sidelong looks and some sullen muttering, the class opened their books. Which of you can tell me how we distinguish between the werewolf and a true wolf? Said Snape. Everyone sat motionless in this silence. Everyone except Hermione, whose hand, as it so often did, shot straight up into the air. Anyone? Said Snape, ignoring Hermione. His twisted smile was back. Are you telling me Professor Lupin hasn't even taught you the basic distinction between... We told you, Parvati said suddenly. We haven't got as far as werewolves yet. We're still on... Silence! Snarled Snape. Well. I never thought I'd meet a third-year class who wouldn't even recognize a werewolf when they saw one. I shall make a point of informing Professor Dumbledore how very behind you all are. Please, sir, said Hermione, whose hand was still in the air, the werewolf differs from the true wolf in several small ways. The snout of the werewolf... That is the second time you have spoken out of turn, Miss Granger, said Snape coolly. 5 moral points from Gryffindor for being insufferable know-it-all. Hermione was very red, put down her hand, and stared at the floor with her eyes full of tears. It was a mark of how much the class loathed Snape that they were all glaring at him, because every one of them had called Hermione a know-it-all at least once. And Ron, who told Hermione she was a know-it-all at least twice a week, said loudly, You asked us a question, and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told? The class knew instantly he'd gone too far. Snape advanced to Ron slowly, and the room held its breath. Detention, Weasley, Snape said silkily, his face very close to Ron's. And if I ever hear you criticize the way I teach class again, you will be very sorry indeed. No one made a sound throughout the rest of the lesson. They sat and made notes for werewolves in the textbooks, while Snape prowled up and down the rows, asking and examining the work they had been doing with Professor Lupin. Oh, very poorly explained. That's incorrect. The kappa is more commonly found in Magnolia. Professor Lupin gave his 8 out of 10. Ugh, I would have given that a 3. When the bell rang, Snape held them back.